Welcome into the Hard Count, the People's College Football Show. It is Thursday, November 7th, 2024. We were getting ready for the show, having everything nice, neat, and tidy. We got our topics, we got our docket. We're going to talk some Miami a little bit later, a little bit of Georgia, and Florida, just out of nowhere, dropping a bombshell on us. They're going to keep head coach Billy Napier for the foreseeable future. That is announced via a message from Scott Strickland, Florida's athletic director. So what do we make of all this? So we'll talk about it right now. First, I just want to touch on a couple of things that Scott Strickland touched on in this letter. I'll just read it to you. Quote, I wanted to let you know that Billy Napier will continue as head coach or head football coach of the Florida Gators. As we've seen these past several weeks, the young men on this team represent what it means to be a Gator. Their resolve, effort, and execution are evident in their performance and growth each week, building a foundation that promises great success next season and beyond. So that's just a part of the letter that he refers to and why they're keeping Billy Napier. But this is a lot. This is a lot because I think many of us, myself included, thought after that Texas A&M game, like, hey, that's probably all she wrote. That's probably going to be the end of the Billy Napier era because early on now there was some things that just quite frankly looked a little bit inexcusable, like to come out against Miami, against another coach that was hired the same time as you, and to look not just to they get beat, they weren't competitive. Like it was bad. It was very, very bad. Then A&M, they're playing against a redshirt freshman quarterback at your place, and A&M runs through you. And so I think at that point in time, we're all like, okay, probably about time for this thing to be done. Now, as the season progressed, though, we saw Florida, to their credit, to Billy Napier's credit, do what Scott Strickland is speaking to in this letter. You saw them start to not just win football games, but look a lot more organized, look like a better operation overall. And so my gut on this is a couple of thoughts. One, I think the leadership void at the top of Florida administratively probably plays a factor here. I would also say I think if you're keeping Billy Napier, based on what that letter says, if I'm taking Scott Strickland at his word, they are keeping Billy Napier because they believe in a lot of things that, quite frankly, we just must not be seeing on the football field. Now, I understand it's great to beat UCF. It's great to beat Kentucky when they're down. I'm all for that. Great to look competitive against Georgia. But if it's me, I might have waited a little bit longer until the end of the season to get a good gauge for how this thing was potentially going to trend. Because it's great to fight for each other early on in the year. It's great to get up for a game against Georgia. But, like, who are you when you're playing towards the end of the season? And maybe, just maybe, Florida puts themselves in a position where maybe they have a tough loss on the road somewhere. Maybe it is a little bit of a, hey, we're up against it. We took one more tough loss in November, and now we got to circle the wagons one more time. Curious to see how they respond. But again, I mean, more power to Florida, more power to Scott Strickland deciding to keep Billy Napier. Here's one more thing I would say, though. If I'm Florida, you make this move to keep Billy Napier, you don't revisit this thing at the end of September and say, okay, we're going to punt on this. Like, I guess we shouldn't have kept him for another year. Because in that point, like, you're punting on 2 seasons, in my opinion. If you think Billy Napier is the guy, you give him the time to continue to build and solidify the foundation that you keep talking about and keep talking about in this letter in terms of the direction and the progress and all those things. To put it simply, be patient. And that was a big reason why I think a lot of us are surprised that Florida's making this move, because patient isn't necessarily a word that I would use to describe Florida and how they've operated in the past. I would also say, as a fan base, if you're Florida, like, we're talking right now about, can Florida make a bowl game? Can Florida get to 7 wins? Was the conversation going into the season. And so now for Florida, 7 wins in the next couple of years, that's not going to cut it. Like, that's not the standard at Florida. That's not what that logo expects, not what that fan base expects. And quite frankly, given their track record, given their history, I don't think you have to expect less than, winning the conference and national titles. Now, I would say this, though. I don't think you flip the switch next season and all of a sudden you're competing for the SEC. Like, next season, when it comes to expectations, if DJ Lagway is that guy and he ends up translating how I think a lot of us perceive he could translate to, then maybe Florida's an 8-9 win football team. But it's still the SEC. And keep in mind, too, we talk so much about the schedule, how tough it is for Florida, and oh my gosh, they got all these difficult games at the end of November. The schedule next year in the SEC, we're not shuffling the deck here and giving you new opponents. We just flip that thing on its head and say, okay, play that same SEC schedule, just go to their place if they came to your place and vice versa. So, like, the task ahead of Billy Napier here doesn't get a whole lot easier. And so that's why I say this again. If you're making this decision right now, this is for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, till death do us part, or at least until the end of next season. Don't revisit this thing in September and say, oh, man, that was fun. Thanks so much, Billy Napier. But now, because the buyout has decreased, we're going to go ahead and make a pivot here, and now you're fired. See this thing through to the end. Again, I think this is a decision made based on what Scott Strickland is saying and based on, I think, if you're a Florida fan, how you would feel if you were in the camp of keeping Billy Napier. Probably a foundational thing, things that are happening behind closed doors, and have to believe that DJ Lagway, whether it was a front of mind or back of mind decision, had to play in some way, shape, or form into this decision. Again, maybe it's a subconscious thing, but like you got a generational talent at quarterback. It would seem if you were to fire Billy Napier, I'll say this too, you do hit reset on the roster. We talked about that a little bit last week on our Sunday reaction show. Like, if you want to fire Billy Napier, understand you are rolling the dice here on hitting the reset on everything that you have built internally, regardless of what you think they've built internally, whether you think that's phenomenal or whether you think it's not good at all. Like, you would hit the reset because the portal does what the portal does, and you obviously do run the risk of losing a guy like a DJ Lagway, among others. So, a little bit surprising. I don't think many of us saw this coming, but regardless, Florida making their decision to stick with Billy Napier. And again, if it's me, I'm hoping now that it is a long-term decision, long-term meaning you stick with him for another season. Because again, if you were going to fire him in September, you're just punting on the season. And I'm not for that. I don't think Florida fans are for that either. So, welcome into the Hard Count. Again, this is Thursday, November 7th, 2024, last one on the face of the planet. A lot to jump into today. Billy Napier was just the tip of the iceberg there for us here on this show. So glad to have you dialed in. Make sure you're subscribed if you haven't already. Already touched on Billy Napier staying the head coach at Florida. We're going to call our shots here for Week 11 in just a matter of moments. Got a great question the other day, though, on the radio. I do radio every Wednesday in Baton Rouge. And my guy, Hunt Palmer, who hosts the show out there, he said, hey, who's under more pressure this week when it comes to that game Saturday night in Death Valley? Is it Kalen DeBoer or is it Brian Kelly? And that got the gears turning a little bit. We'll answer that question together in a little bit. I think Georgia is in a fascinating spot this week. I think Georgia overall, when it comes to what they've been this season, has been fascinating. Because going into the year, what were they? Perceived national championship favorites. They haven't necessarily looked that way all the time this year. Now, there's points you can look at throughout their season where they've been phenomenal. And you say, oh, wow, okay, that's the Georgia we talked about. Do we see Georgia start to kick a little bit here towards the end of the year? That'll make a little bit more sense a little bit later on. Miami fans, glad to have you all a part of this show. We've had our differences these last couple of weeks, and I want us to have a heart-to-heart conversation here in just a matter of moments as well, and just kind of have a sit down, because I think whenever two people are at odds, it's just best to meet the thing head on and have a face-to-face conversation. So this is not necessarily face-to-face because I can't see y'all, but I hear y'all on the socials, over there on Kane Sport, the Miami on 3 site. I hear y'all. So I want y'all to hear from me here, and we'll unpack our, I don't know if difference is the right word. We'll unpack this potential conflict together as to how I feel about y'all and how I feel about Cam Ward. We'll do that a little bit later. And then also we got the man, the myth, the legend, Caden Smith, or as we call him, Cato, a little bit later, joining the program and breaking down everything in the world of G5 college football. Because now, if you noticed, Boise State, they were ranked 12th in those initial college football playoff rankings. They were not the 12th seed in the college football playoff because they were the G5 potential champ. Like they were just the number 12 team in college football. So by that logic, yes, they would be the 12th seed in the college football playoff if it started tomorrow. There's a chance now Boise State could finish even higher. And is it Boise State's spot to lose? Could Army get in the mix? They were ranked. What about Washington State? Not G5, but the conversation around them kind of persists as they are a Mountain West team more or less this season, or playing a Mountain West schedule, Pac-12 team. Regardless, we got a lot to get into. We're glad to have y'all here. A little bit of madness to start the show, but we appreciate y'all being dialed and appreciate y'all being subscribed. All right, so before we get to calling our shot here, I want to make sure y'all know something. I'm going to check my phone here because we got Andy Staples texting us. We may or may not. We getting him on today, Nick, or no? Andy Staples? Let's see if we can get him on a little bit later in the show. Sound good? Let's do that. Hey, we're just rolling here. Just riffing and rolling here. Obviously, whenever the head coach at Florida has some news around him, probably a good idea to bring in the authority source on college football, one, and then two, the man, the myth, the legend, who actually has deep ties to the University of Florida. So may or may not be getting Andy Staples on a little bit later, but the beat goes on. All right, so with that being said, jumping into Week 11 of the college football season, we've given you our game predictions. Let's just kind of call our shot here for Week 11 of the college football season within those specific games. I already gave you my winner for LSU Alabama. I want to call this shot right now. I do not believe that the Alabama secondary can hang with LSU's wide receivers. That's not me trying to be disrespectful to Bama and what they are in the secondary. It's just a matter of the facts here, because you look at the box score each and every game for Bama, and it doesn't look egregious. Like, you see what they are when it comes to yards per pass. I believe they're top 15 in America in terms of what they allow defensively. So that's not bad. But when you're looking at the way they're trending in specific games, some things that make me a little bit concerned here about the Alabama Crimson Tide. Because not just the game where Georgia goes for over 4 bills, like that's impressive through the air from Carson Beck, that's sort of its own separate category, but across other spots for Alabama, you see a lot of quarterbacks, what I would say is get right against them. Like Lenora Sellers, he's going to be a star in the sport for a long time. He's the future at South Carolina, but before playing Alabama, he had not had a game where he went for more than 200 yards. He got right and went for over 200 yards and darn near beat Alabama in that football game. Okay, so that's a little bit of a trend. You see Nico Iamaleava kind of struggle at different points leading into the Alabama game. And granted, it was in Neyland. Granted, it was a big spot. And I think Nico's going to be really good for a long time as well. But what happened? Nico Iamaleava hits a big throw downfield to Dante Thornton, drops in a bucket to Chris Brazzell, sort of had a get-right game, if you will, against Alabama. And so if I'm reading those tea leaves and seeing those clues, I'm looking at what LSU has, and I'm like, oh boy, this will be the best quarterback-wide receiver combo that Alabama has played at this point in the year. Doesn't help that it's in Death Valley. I think that LSU has the juice in the perimeter, and I think that is the difference in this football game for the Tigers. Kyron Lacy specifically, a guy I want to make sure we mention early on just so we can go back to this. He is a man-to-man problem. Bama likes to play a lot of man. They trust their guys out there. That's great, but if you don't win those matchups consistently enough against Kyron Lacy, even if you do win a couple of those matchups, like Kyron Lacy covered is not really covered. Like a 50-50 ball for Kyron Lacy is really more like 80-20. So Kyron Lacy, LSU's wide receiving core, I think that they are the difference makers in this game against Alabama, all right? Here's another one for you. We talk a lot about Travis Hunter in relation to the Heisman Trophy, and I've said this before, I think he is your Heisman Trophy winner, barring something wildly unforeseen. If Colorado just has a couple of just horrific showings, maybe that changes our mind a little bit. But like, if this is truly about the best player in college football, Travis Hunter should win that award. Now, the tricky part with the Heisman, it's not just about being the best player in college football, is it? No, it's about having a great September. September, yes, but a great November, more importantly, is when you win the award. And probably more specifically within that conversation, you need to have the big stages, right? That was a big thing for us going into the year, why you would be worried about Travis Hunter not winning the Heisman Trophy. Hey, I don't know if Colorado will be competitive enough in November for them to, give him those stages he needs to win the award. Well, fast forward the tape, Colorado is very much so in the mix for the Big 12 championship. By that logic, very much so in the mix for a college football playoff berth. And with this game this weekend, got a bit of a stage against Texas Tech. On the road, Texas Tech generating some more juice as well with them beating Iowa State previously. I just mentioned, got to go to Lubbock. Big noon kickoff will be there. Okay, so the national stage here, that ingredient is getting added in a little bit more to the opportunity for Travis Hunter this weekend. Then you pair it with the fact that the Texas Tech defense, God bless them, they're allowing over 280 passing yards a game. That's 125th in America. So big noon, gettable defense, Travis Hunter, November. I think this is a spot now we can point back to. If Travis Hunter wins the Heisman Trophy, we say, I don't know if that's the Heisman moment, but it is a Heisman moment that propelled him to ultimately win that award. So with Prize Picks, we're going to go ahead and take Travis Hunter's square of 101.5 receiving yards. Y'all take the more there. Just trust me on this. Take the more there. I already mentioned what Texas Tech isn't doing in the secondary. Use code HARDCOUNT, $50 in promo funds when you use code HARDCOUNT and play $5 in lineup. So lock in with that. We appreciate Prize Picks bringing y'all the hard count today. That is, y'all, I don't want to jinx it. That feels like a gimme. Feels like a gimme, and feels like Travis Hunter is set for a big game, a Heisman-esque moment kind of game against Texas Tech this weekend. Now, we're going to zig when people zag a little bit here. We did this last week with Ohio State when it came to how we expected them to run the football against Penn State. We're going to kind of follow that same attitude, if you will, when it comes to how we feel about Georgia and Ole Miss. Like Carson Beck here, what's been the talking point all week long? Carson Beck, turnover machine, keeps throwing the football to the other team, and that's not untrue. I mean, he would tell you that. He has not done a great job taking care of the football. I think Carson Beck's probably sick of hearing that, whether he would tell you or not. I think he is going to take extra care of the football this weekend, and I think during this week of practice now, what's Georgia watching on tape? Ole Miss taking care of the football darn near twice a game. All right, Ole Miss does a phenomenal job turning the opposition over. So if there wasn't already a heightened sense of I got to take care of the football for Carson Beck because of all that's being said about him, what Ole Miss does on the field defensively amps that up even more. I think Carson Beck takes care of the football. I think he throws 0 interceptions. And I also think offensively now, I think Georgia's offense helps him a bit with how they call it. Because as much as we harp on Carson Beck for pressing, like, gosh dang, Georgia offensively stopped pressing on Carson Beck then. You're throwing the football 38 times a game. I mean, I'm not tremendous with numbers, but the more that you throw the football, the greater percentage chance is that you maybe throw the football to the other team. So I think Carson Beck cleans it up in a massive way this weekend for Georgia. I think he throws 0 interceptions. Go ahead and take that one to the bank. Now, here's one more take for you going into the weekend. Indiana, they got Michigan this week. They got Michigan going to Bloomington now. And as much as we've talked about Indiana being kind of a surprise of the college football season, a lot of people say they're disrespected, they're this, they're that. I mean, I don't know what's true or not about them being disrespected, being in the top 10 in the first college football playoff rankings in your Indiana. Like, I think maybe we just say, awesome, cool, we'll keep it rolling, win the Big Ten, and we'll be in the dance. Even if you lose one game, you're in the dance. Neither here nor there. My opinion here, the take is that I think we finish this game against Michigan, if we're Indiana, and the whole country says, whoa. Okay, if you weren't already on board with the idea that Indiana is a college football playoff team, I think that idea becomes solidified in your mind after you see them play Michigan. And this is not me dunking on Michigan. I think Michigan's gettable, but I would also say that Michigan has a lot of NFL players. Like, no shade to Indiana's schedule. We've all seen what they've had to go through. We've seen them, the best team they've played to this point is Washington. Michigan's got some NFL players. Michigan will be the most talented team Indiana has played to this point in the year. And so I say all that to say the filter that is available here for Indiana is, I think, an exciting one. And I think if you're an Indiana fan, this is your chance to really kind of solidify who you are to the college football world and make a good statement for the future of your college football playoff aspirations. All right. So we're just moving and grooving in here, man. We got Nick break up and about, turn on the monitor, which means that we're probably going to have Andy Staples on here in just a matter of moments. So appreciate everybody on live. Appreciate everyone watching right now. Make sure you have subscribed. Make sure you're dialed into everything going on right here on the On3 YouTube channel, because you don't just have this show at 10 a.m. Central Time, 11 a.m. Eastern, for all y'all watching Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Every single morning, you got Andy and Ari on 3. Every single morning, every single weekday morning, you got them talking college football. It's a great show. Go check it out on the YouTube channel. Also, go check it out on podcast. So, Nick, we got my man on? Sweet. All right, well, we're just rocking and rolling here. I get a call 5 minutes before the show from the producer of Andy and Ari on 3, River Bailey. He says, hey, just a heads up, there may be some news breaking about Billy Napier during your show. If that happens, don't you worry. Andy Staples ready to jump on Live in Living Color. So that happens, and now, Live in Living Color, we have the man, the myth, the legend, Andy Staples. Andy, good morning. Thanks for jumping on. What do you make of all this? Billy Napier staying at Florida, allegedly.
What? It's not alleged, dude. The AD put out a statement.
Like, it's happening. Let Les Miles us here or what?
It's happening.
Okay.
It's a very interesting situation, JD. Because I don't know that I've seen one like this where the coach was just sort of like done, left for dead, and the team rallied around him the way it has. The thing is, like, if you talk to rank and file Florida fans, they're furious about this move. Because their thing is, look, he's 13-15. He's an under 500 coach. What are you doing? 3 years is enough to understand that.
Sure.
What the administration is saying is they've seen progress enough to say when you have a potentially transformational quarterback like DJ Lagway and a chance to further revamp the roster, that maybe they can get over the hump next year. Now, my thing is there's some serious stuff they've got to do if they want to avoid Groundhog Day, because if this doesn't work, everybody's getting fired. Billy Napier will get fired this time next year. Scott Strickland, the athletic director, will get fired. The whole senior athletic staff will get fired. Like, it'll get wiped out because there'll be a new president next year at Florida. This has to work for all of these people to stay, which is another reason why this is happening now. But if they want to make it work, they're going to have to do something Florida has thus far not been willing to do, and that is go all in terms of transfer portal acquisitions. You got to do what Ole Miss did. You got to do what Ohio State did. You got to say, look, you're pushing in. You have the resources. Go get a roster. And look, they had raised money to buy out Billy Napier because the way his buyout is structured is $26 million, half of it's due up front. They had pledges to provide that $13 million it would cost up front. There's money in the banana stand. It's just a matter of how you want to use that. So if you wanted to take, say, half that money and push it toward player acquisition with revenue share coming and probably $15 million for football coming from the school, then you might be able to put together a pretty good roster.
Andy, tell me this, because I think the beginning of our conversation actually makes me think of something. Florida has Texas, LSU, Ole Miss left in terms of the more difficult opponents on their schedule. We got to go to Florida State. It is what it is. I understand we're releasing a statement. I understand we're saying, hey, Billy Napier's our guy. Let's just say that the worst case scenario plays out here. And people are already upset. Like, the volume is already cranked up. You mentioned it. Like, if I'm a Florida fan, I am livid. I thought we were getting Lane Kiffin. I thought we were going after Eli Drinkwitz. Like, I already had visions of making that happen in sometime in the near future. Let's say they just have a horrific showing down the stretch here. The roster's dinged up. We'll see how healthy DJ Lagway is the rest of the way. Is there a world now where the pitchforks and the torches of the Florida fan base, paired with potentially a lackluster or below lackluster product on the field, causes us to hit a little Uno reverse here?
It's a great question, JD. I don't think so. I don't think you put this out thinking, because you know what could happen here. Like, DJ Lagway is nursing a hamstring injury. He was carted off the field against Georgia last week. So I realize he's questionable for the Texas game. They said it's not as serious an injury as it looked. That said, he's your future. You're not rushing him back either. So there's no guarantee that they've got DJ Lagway in this game or the LSU game or the Ole Miss game. Maybe they do. They still might lose those games even with him. If you get trounced in those games, yeah, the pitchforks and the torches will be out. But I think you've backed yourself into a corner in this case. You're looking very, very bad if you go back on this now.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the thought that I had going into this week. Go ahead.
If I'm a candidate, like, let's say they did change their minds. If I'm a candidate, I'm not sure I want to deal with these people.
No, especially with all the madness this offseason, no. No, not at all. I mean, so here's my question, Andy, because going into the week, I was like, all right, we don't know what DJ Lagway looks like. This is on Sunday morning. We're still not sure what his future is this season. Obviously, you're fired up that he's going to hopefully be available for you at some point during the finish of this season. But, like, my question was, well, how much more can you really learn about Florida if you have at best, a recovering DJ Lagway? At worst, you have a transfer from Yale that everyone has beaten to our brains. They're a transfer from Yale quarterback. It's how much of this is centered on the quarterback position? And if Graham Mertz is healthy, do we make this move if we're Florida?
Well, that's another question. But if Graham Mertz is healthy and still doing that weird, he gets 2 series, DJ gets 1 series, you may be firing Billy Napier right now anyway.
Yeah.
The fact that you got to see DJ Lagway as the starter is what allows you to say there is hope here. DJ Lagway is probably more important than Billy Napier in this equation, if we're being real about it.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's unique to this situation. I think there are so few purely transformational quarterbacks that when you've got one, you got to figure out how to keep him.
Yeah, it's the whole thing is so fascinating because my big thing, Andy, was like, well, I get that there's the whole situation with the quarterback. Like, if I'm Florida, I might have waited a little bit long. I might have waited till the end of the season before we make this move. And I think furthermore, like, if I'm Florida, the thing that would disappoint me the most as a fan is if you get to September and it's the end of September, let's call it week 4, week 5, and we're like, actually, call it 2-2 or whatever. We're going to punt on this whole Billy Napier experience. If I'm a Florida fan, I'm like, well, we just punted on essentially 2 seasons, if that's the point.
You're right. We've actually seen this before. We saw this at the end of the 2015 season at LSU, where they were going to fire they were going to fire Les Miles. They floated it out there, allowed Les Miles to marshal his support, and 2 weeks later they decided they're keeping him, and then wasted an entire offseason because they fired him, a month into the following season. In this particular case, I think you'll know, because like I said, if they don't go into the portal and seriously upgrade the roster, they need to upgrade at edge rusher, they need to upgrade it on the offensive line, they need to upgrade at receiver, then you'll know by January if they were actually serious about this or not. And if they weren't, it's going to be a very moribund offseason. It's going to be dead. Like, there's going to be no excitement whatsoever.
It is a risky move, to say the least. Now, one more question for you here, Andy. Let's just walk this thing through and say that you do keep Billy Napier for the duration of the 2025 season. What is a win total that would pacify Florida fans and maybe give Billy Napier even another year in Gainesville?
College football playoff.
Wow. Okay.
Make the college football playoff. The days of, like, can he get to 500? Like, that's unacceptable at the University of Florida. Like, worrying about whether your coach can get to 500 is loser thinking.
Yeah.
Like, it's got to be college football playoff or bust, with the understanding that it might be bust.
Yeah.
Like, Ole Miss this year pushed all in. JD, if they lose Saturday, they're not making the playoff. But they tried.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. I mean, I'm glad you said that, because every time we talk about Florida on this show, it's like, well, can they get to 7? Hey, maybe 8's possible. It's like, what are we doing?
And that's what drives the Florida fans insane. They cannot handle that, because they're not that far removed from when Florida was winning SEC championships and competing for national championships. And the idea that you got to scratch and claw to win 7 or 8 games is unacceptable. Because Ohio State's not saying that. Alabama's not saying that. Georgia's not saying that. Like, that's not acceptable for a program that expects to compete at the top of the conference. And they're not acting like it right now, so they need to figure out how to start acting like it. And either they'll get serious and they'll get a roster for Billy Napier to actually try to compete and make the playoff, or none of these people will be there and somebody else will.
Especially in the state where Mario Cristobal was hired at the same time as you, different situations, but same state. He still got hired for a reason at Miami, because Miami wasn't all that when he got hired. And then you saw what happened in that first game. So I'm fascinated by this. Andy, I appreciate you jumping on and making sense of all this. Obviously, we will continue to unpack this as the days go on, as the season goes on. Again, y'all, subscribe here, Andy and Ari on 3, every weekday morning. Just bangers all the time. Andy, appreciate you, man.
Thank you, JD. Appreciate it.
Andy Staples, Florida alum. Everything college football all the time over there with him and Ari. Andy and Ari on 3 every weekday morning. Make sure you're dialed into that. Great stuff. I have a feeling now that will be a conversation on their show. They have frequently as well, so make sure you are dialed in there. Lots going on, man. How about this? Live action Thursday, baby. You got to love it. Florida keeping Billy Napier. So those are our thoughts on that. But we do actually have other college football games happening this Saturday. A lot of pressure on Billy Napier, obviously, to go win big next season. But who's under more pressure when it comes to the game in Death Valley Saturday night? You got LSU, you got Bama. Kalen DeBoer in year 1, Brian Kelly in year 3 right now. And I got asked this question from our guy, Hunt Palmer, that does a tremendous job in Baton Rouge on the radio. I go over there every single Wednesday, I do a hit with him. And he asked a great question. He said, who is under more pressure to win on Saturday night? Is it Kalen DeBoer or is it Brian Kelly? And I think any way you answer this, whatever your opinion is, I don't think you're without a case. Like, I'll start with Kalen DeBoer here. Like, the expectations for the fan base of Alabama is really where that pressure comes from. Like, if you were to lose this game, I think it would feel a lot like whenever you fail a test early on in your college career. You get it back and you're like, oh my gosh, I just came from high school where I got relatively good grades. I wasn't really failing tests unless I wasn't studying. I studied for this thing, got my first exam back, and like I wasn't even close. And you sort of have this world is ending moment with yourself. And it might last a couple days, it might last 24 hours, but at some point in time, the sun rises again, you look around, you say, okay, all right, that wasn't ideal. However, one of my first exams, a lot of semester left, this doesn't define me. So if you do lose this game, now understand there will be that world is ending moment in Tuscaloosa, and it'll happen a lot throughout the following week. So that might be our clickbait defense if that happens, and we'll talk about that on the show next week. But, like, Alabama is not used to losing 3 games in the regular season. Last time it happened was 2010. 2010. What was going on in 2010? I think LeBron James might have still been with the Miami Heat. Like, that's how long ago that was. They're not used to this. And so does it mean actually internally things are blowing up in Tuscaloosa within that building? No. It means it's a year 1 team under Kalen DeBoer. Got some pieces through the portal, lost a lot through the portal. I don't think it defines Kalen DeBoer as much as maybe I think the following week would lead you to believe that it is. Now, I think the real pressure, my answer to this question, to give you a definitive answer here, I think the real pressure is on Brian Kelly. Because for Brian Kelly now, it is a mix of the opportunity that's in front of you with where Alabama's at, and it also is paired with the idea that you're a team that's in year 3 versus a team that's in year 1 under Kalen DeBoer. Like, Bama now has 2 losses. Okay, so they're probably as gettable as they've been in a long, long time with Kalen DeBoer at the helm. This is a team now that is coming to your place to play you at night, a scenario in which Brian Kelly has never lost. Like, this is the time now if you're Brian Kelly. This is the time if you're LSU to, like I said on the Tuesday show, shift the optics as to where LSU stands in the SEC going forward and where Alabama stands in the SEC going forward. Now, whether that's actually true or not is a whole other discussion. The optics is the key thing here, because what do optics generate? Recruiting juice. Okay, if you can walk into a living room as Brian Kelly and say, hey, I know you're between us and Bama. However, right now I'm 2-1 against Alabama at LSU, and I don't plan on stopping. Look at where we're at. Look at where they're at. Look at that game. That's the opportunity here for Brian Kelly. And to waste that opportunity, I think would just be so frustrating for the fan base in the moment. But then you have that world is ending moment in the same way that Alabama has it, but your world is ending moment, I think, turns into world is ending moments. It persists throughout the next few days. I think it might persist throughout the offseason, because the feeling would be that if you're Brian Kelly, hey, the expectation at LSU is to win national titles. And to win national titles, I don't think it's a stretch to say you probably got to get through Alabama more than once, potentially throughout the course of a season. And so if that's the expectation and you couldn't get that done against year 1 Kalen DeBoer at Alabama, like, Kalen DeBoer, man, say what you want about what they haven't done this year, they're not staying stagnant. Like, I don't expect Alabama to be a whole lot worse in the next several seasons under Kalen DeBoer. He's a winner. He's won everywhere he's been. So again, this is your chance to get him. And if you don't get him right now, when's it going to happen? I'm not saying it can never happen, but I am saying right now the opportunity is so massive in that sense. And also, too, let's talk about the college football playoff for a second, because this Bama-LSU rivalry, it's bigger than any college football playoff implications could ever be. Make sure that's clear. But if we do want to talk about the elimination game status of this contest in Baton Rouge, make no mistake now, if you win this game, look what you have left. Got to go to Florida. Okay. Should be favored. I know it's the Swamp, but still should be favored. Vanderbilt. It's not your mom and dad's Vanderbilt, but still, you should be favored. You get them at the crib. And you got Oklahoma at the crib to finish the season. All 3 games, LSU probably should and will be favored in. So if you beat Alabama and you find yourself at 10-2 at the end of the college football season, forget what happens with the SEC title game and all that. I think LSU, as a one-loss conference or a one-conference loss team in the SEC, I get you got the USC loss. It is what it is. I think LSU makes the college football playoff. And so not just is this an elimination game for Bama and LSU, this is borderline for LSU a playoff all but clinching kind of game. Now, I understand, I'm not saying those games are just, layups. I'm not talking about Vanderbilt and that light or Florida or Oklahoma. But again, those are games that are much less of a hurdle than Alabama is if you're LSU. So I truly believe that for Brian Kelly, the time is now. I think the pressure is on him because of the opportunity, because you're in year 3, and because of where Bama is right now. The chance to shift the optics in the long run, those chances don't come around every so often. I mean, like this is a window here for Brian Kelly to kick the door in and to firmly place LSU ahead of Alabama in the SEC for at least the next calendar year and potentially further in Baton Rouge. So, with that being said, the square that we love in this game, I alluded to it already earlier on in this live show. Aaron Anderson, a receiver for LSU, his receiving yard total is 53.5. We love the more there. I already told you I think Alabama's secondary is very gettable. Also, Aaron Anderson been putting in work the last few seasons. Last few games, throughout the course of the season. 4 out of the last 5 games, he has averaged 78 yards. All right? So, again, if that total is 53.5, feel pretty good about where things stand in relation to LSU's opportunity in this game. So, code HARDCOUNT, $5 in lineups, gets you $50 in promo funds moving forward. All right, so we had some madness here, and we're just talking about the show here on the fly. So, Nick, we were going to have Cato in the next few minutes. Let's push that back a little bit. We'll go here after our Georgia segment. Sound good? Amazing. All right, here we go. Rocking and rolling. So what happens when you get some breaking news during the show, man? Fun stuff happens. We just do show meetings on air. That's how it goes. All right, let's keep a good thing going now. We already talked about the state of Florida a little bit. Florida is keeping Billy Napier. Miami fans, let's have a conversation here, because my mentions have been a little bit busy over the course of the last few weeks when it comes to how I feel about Miami. And I'll be real, it's been a little bit surprising to me, and I'll tell you why. So the pushback has been, hey, we think Miami probably should be ranked a little bit higher than where you have us, JD. I have Miami right around 6 in my own personal rankings after this past weekend. Miami fans think they should be top 5. I get it. I understand it. I'm here for it. Miami fans are also upset with where I have Cam Ward in relation to the Heisman Trophy race. I think Ashton Genty's been unbelievable. I think Travis Hunter's been unbelievable. And I think Dylan Gabriel has that Heisman moment with what he did against Ohio State. So, with that being said, this pushback here, I think we're not getting each other here when it comes to where we stand with Miami. I think the thing that I've seen the most in my mentions is this guy's a Miami hater. This guy doesn't like the Canes. This guy's somewhat, somehow, some way against what we're doing out here at the U. Put a pin in that. Preseason, here's what we said about Miami. We said Miami's going to win the ACC when I believe they had the 3rd best odds to win the conference. We said Cam Ward wouldn't just have a good year. We said he will have a top 5 statistically historical season at Miami this upcoming season in terms of what they've done there over the school's history. We said that. We also said Cam Ward to Xavier Restrepo would be a top 10 duo in the sport. Again, this is all preseason. So this guy doesn't like Miami. I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing it so much. I'll also say this. When we first started this show in Waco, Texas, in a lobby, at that point in time, we're doing like a couple hundred views, all right? Like we're not moving the needle at all. However, the Miami Hurricane fan base, one of the first fan bases to wrap their arms around us and to welcome us into this college football space. So there's a special place in our heart for the folks out there at the U. I'll say that. But let's talk about this. The conversation of, well, we should be ranked higher. JD, the college football playoffs got us at 4. You got us at like 6. What's going on here? Here's what I would say. Do you think you should have beat Cal by 20? Yeah, probably right. Do you think that you should have been within 4 points of Virginia Tech? Absolutely not. Should Duke ever, in any world, be up at the half against Miami with that roster, with Cam Ward? And this is not throwing shade on those operations. Like, this is just, I think, expectations that Miami would have of their own team, that the fan base would have of their own team. And I think with how much we expect of Miami, it's fair to be a little bit disappointed when they don't meet your expectations. Like, if you have a super smart kid and he gets a B+ in a class, you're not patting him on the back for getting a B+. You're saying you are a 4.0 kind of student. Why are we getting a B+? And so that's not me saying that we're docking Miami down because they've won football games. I'm docking Miami because I haven't seen them play 4 quarters of football. And if they do play 4 quarters of football, y'all, there's an argument for them to be a top 3 team in America. Full stop. Like, that roster, when Cam Ward is on, with what they are offensively, like, there is an argument for them to be a top 3 team, right? That's me telling you this right now. So I would also say this. When it comes to the rankings, those change every week. Like, where I have Miami this week and where I have Miami in 2 weeks, it's a fluid conversation. That's what we're doing here. This is not a projection or prediction. This is where we see them right now. And the potential of Miami is massive. I already told you, I think they are potentially a top 3 team. But with what they haven't done against a Vatech, against a Cal, against a Duke even at times, I'm left wanting more. So nobody's down on Miami. If anything, we just have high standards for Miami, and we want to see them reach that. So in the Cam Ward Heisman discussion, kind of like the rankings, fluid, it's not a prediction. When you see those graphics on Sunday morning, and it has myself, Ari Wasserman, Andy Staples, Charles Power, and it has our Heisman rankings on it, those are not predictions. If you're asking me to predict right now, I'd say Cam Ward's probably going to be second in the Heisman Trophy race behind a guy like Travis Hunter. And even Cam Ward can move ahead of him, just so we're on the same page there. But the reason why I haven't moved Cam Ward ahead of guys like a Dylan Gabriel, to me, the Heisman is so much about the Heisman moment, for better or for worse. And Cam Ward, like, it's not his fault. Where's that Heisman moment at this point in the year? Like, the Cal game was phenomenal against, a Cal team that, quite frankly, you should have probably beat the brakes off of a little bit more, but it is what it is. You don't have a bunch of big games in November. Like Florida State, they were pretty mid, so we can't give you a ton of credit when it comes to the Heisman Trophy race there. You have Duke. Okay, great. It's Duke at Georgia Tech. Awesome. Wake Forest, Syracuse. I think the stage for Cam Ward, if you want to win the Heisman Trophy, is that ACC title game. Like, that's the opportunity now where the entire country will be watching. It'll be, you would have to believe, a team like a Clemson or SMU. That's your stage if you're Cam Ward to go win the Heisman Trophy. I'm not down on what he's done to this point in the year, but I compare it with what Travis Hunter's done, It's pretty historical. Compare it with Ashton Genty, kind of same deal, pretty historical. Dylan Gabriel, the Heisman moment against Ohio State, I think that helps him a little bit when it comes to that discussion. So I'm not down on Cam Ward. I'm not down on Miami. Again, this is just a fluid situation. I think the Canes are going to be phenomenal this year, but that's just the way this whole thing shakes out for me. So I want to leave you with this. I am not grading Miami against the, well, they won 7 games last year curve. Like, that's great. If we're grading them on that curve, absolutely. Put Miami wherever you want. I'm grading Miami against their potential. I'm grading Miami against the idea that they, I believe, in that locker room have national title aspirations. Now, will they get there? They have the potential to, I think, really make some noise in that discussion based on what they have on this roster. Again, the potential of what they have, what they did via the portal, what they are right now in the trenches. They have the key ingredients. To me, the key ingredients to go compete for a national title, line of scrimmage play and quarterback play. Quarterback play, you are behind nobody in that discussion. What you did via the portal to go get a Simeon Barrow, a Tyler Barron, what you have up front with Francis Mawanoa, like, they got the pieces here to make it all go. I want to see it all go consistently. All right, so Miami fans, I hope we weren't unclear there. I hope we were able to have a good heart-to-heart, good transparency, and excited to keep this conversation going with y'all. So appreciate y'all getting at me on the socials, Instagram, Twitter, at JD Pickell, but most importantly, make sure you are subscribed right here. Big reason why you got to be subscribed right here. We've already had Andy Staples on the show. This is a loaded show today, baby. We also got G5 czar, Caden Smith. We know him as Cato. Cato, what's going on, baby? Appreciate you sneaking in here, man.
What's good, JD? It's always a pleasure to be on the hard count, especially when we're talking group of 5 per usual. But now we're getting close to this playoffs. The first rankings came out, so I'm super excited to talk about where the G5 kind of lies in all of this.
And we got some madness now. And madness may be the wrong word, but like, we saw those rankings come out on Tuesday night. A little bit of the eyes emoji, if you will. You see Boise State, they were ranked 12th. Not like, oh, they'll be 12th if you were to, seed the college football playoff today. Like, they were just ranked 12th, period. Your thoughts on Boise State and the potential now, we talked about this in the office, the potential of them finishing maybe ahead of 12. Maybe they do get a first-round bye in the college football playoff as one of the top 4 conference champs.
Yeah, it's super interesting, JD. You talk about Boise State. They're in the driver's seat when it comes to the group of 5 being in the team that gets their seed when it comes to that 12 seed we've been talking about. But it looks like Boise State could have the chance to potentially get a higher seed just looking at the metrics and what we have going on as far as the seeds in front of them. You talk about 8 teams between the SEC and the Big Ten both taking those top 12 spots. Well, as long as there is a ACC or a Big 12 team that's behind Boise State that could potentially win their conference championship, I think there's definitely room for Boise State to potentially find themselves as a higher than a 12 seed and maybe even get themselves a first round bye. You have to remember the verbiage of this is the highest 4 ranked group, not group of 5, not power 4, highest ranked conference champion. So as long as SMU could maybe take down Miami in a conference championship, they're below Boise State right now. You have Iowa State, you have Colorado, you have Kansas State who could all beat BYU potentially in a conference title game as well. There's room for Boise State to do that. So when it comes to the group of 5, Boise State has it on lock. They're going to continue rolling through their Mountain West championship game. They have to win their Mountain West championship game in order to make it to the cut. That's the biggest thing and the most important thing for the Broncos right now. But if they do all of that and take care of business like they should, there's definitely an avenue, just given the madness of the ACC and the Big 12 and the potential of that, for Boise State to potentially get an even higher seed and a first round bye than that 12 seed we've been talking about.
Dude, that was one of my first thoughts when you and I were texting during the day for those rankings. I was like, dude, that'd be awesome if Boise State moved up. But hey, the 12 seed branding would take a bit of a hit. Like, there's no merch or anything out there, but if we did, it'd be like, hey, sorry, send those back. We'll rebrand to like the 4 seed, I guess. How much do you think they need to happen to ultimately be one of those highest ranked 4 conference champions? Is it like, hey, BYU just drops 1 game, or is it like, hey, no, we need Colorado as a 2-loss team to go win the Big 12? How does this shake out in your mind where Boise State could get a first round bye?
Yeah, JD, I think it's really interesting when you look at Boise State, a team like Notre Dame, a team like Washington State, who we'll talk about maybe a little bit later. But there's a couple teams who really don't have the opportunity in these rankings to boost their resume much further than they already have. Boise State's kind of already gotten through the easy part of their schedule. They'll play a decent, pretty good San Diego State team. They'll play Oregon State, but they're going to take care of business. There's not going to really be much room for them to continue getting big wins. Their loss against Oregon's probably one of the best losses in the country, and I think that's what really separates themselves from other G5 teams. When you talk about the movement that's going to happen going forward, it's going to be really interesting to see what the committee does with some of these top 15-ish ranked matchups that we still have. We have Alabama, LSU this weekend. Obviously, Indiana still has to play Ohio State, Tennessee, Georgia. There's a lot of games against teams against one another in that top 15 range. And however those games turn out and how they decide to move those teams, the committee that's going to decide Boise State's fate. So Boise State just has to continue taking care of business. They're not going to really have many opportunities to move up in these rankings. But if some teams take some losses, there's some 2-loss teams, some 3-loss teams that are ahead of them now that maybe take a hit hit below them, then all of a sudden we could definitely have that conversation about them potentially getting that first round bye, depending on how the ACC and the Big 12 shake out. Because I just can't imagine a world where they're going to be ranked ahead of a SEC or a Big 10 team, regardless of what the conference championship picture looks like.
Now, ranked at 25 in those initial rankings, Army, folks out there in West Point. So they're looking at that 25 ranking, and you're fired up, but then you continue to watch the rankings show, and you're like, okay, where's Boise? Okay, Boise State's at 5. No, Boise State's at 3. No, Boise State's at 12. Okay, so they got some ground to make up here. Is there a world where Army can beat Notre Dame, they finish undefeated, they're the American Athletic Conference champs, and then they can pass Boise State? Or it's just like, hey, Boise State, they've got too much ground here. If they handle business, like, that's all she wrote.
Yeah, call me crazy, JD, but I think even if Army beats Notre Dame, I think the Boise State narrow loss on the road against Oregon, against the top-ranked team in the eyes of the committee for the entire country, I think that's still going to give them the edge there. I think a neutral site win against Notre Dame, a team who would now be taking their second loss to NIU, add Army to the conversation for the group of 5 for that as well. And I think right now we're also seeing Army kind of take a hit as far as the CFP outlook on them with the rankings, with their strength of schedule. The AP poll and the coaches poll have them at 18 and 19 respectively, but then you look at the college football playoff rankings, they put them right at 25. And this is a team who this weekend when they play North Texas, that'll be the first FBS team they play with a winning record, with an above 500 record. So their strength of schedule is definitely not hurting them. I think even if they run the table, they'll have the undefeated argument. They'll have the win over Notre Dame that I think might look a little bit less than compared to a loss 3 points against Oregon in the committee's eyes. But once again, like I said before, if Boise State does in fact lose the Mountain West Championship, which it's looking like they're going to get a good fight against Colorado State or UNLV in that game, if they lose that matchup, that opens the floodgates for everybody. And I think you have to imagine that Army would be the top contender in that scenario.
Is there anyone else in that discussion? I know we're going to talk about Washington State in a second here, but when it comes to like true G5 teams, you got Army and like, is Navy factoring in there? I know they're in the same conference as Army, so I guess if Navy were to beat Army in the conference title game, that would cork the bat a little bit. We talking about anybody else in the discussion of the G5, or is it really just like Army, Boise State, and then unless something wild happens, that's kind of the lay of the land?
Yeah, once again, the whole G5 is in the hands of Boise State. They'd have to lose their Mountain West title game for this all to open up. But if they do, it opens up the opportunity for everyone else. Army has that first chair, kind of that first next man up mentality as far as the group of 5 making the playoff. But after that, it does open some things up for some other programs. I think a program to watch would be whoever beats Boise State in that conference championship game. In that scenario, Colorado State's already taken 3 losses, 1 to Texas, 1 to Colorado. I think their resume is not strong enough even if they win that title game. But UNLV, if they find themselves in that game, if Colorado State loses another regular season game, they go head-to-head with Boise State, go 1-1, win the conference title. They have some impressive wins, like we mentioned before on this program, over Kansas, over Houston, a close loss in overtime to Syracuse. I think they definitely have the resume. They've already been ranked before as well. They definitely have the resume to make it in there. But then outside of that conference, I think you have to look at the American Army running the table like we mentioned before, but don't sleep on Tulane. Tulane's gotten the most votes in the AP poll and the coaches poll outside of the top 25 last week, and they're a team that lost 7 points against Kansas State. They lost in a close battle to Oklahoma. That's not aging super well, but they've been rolling ever since. They have an excellent coach. They have an excellent opportunity to have a strong finish to the season and get a win over Memphis, get a win over Navy, and then potentially beat Army in that conference title game. So I think they're poised a little bit as well. And then outside of those 2 teams, Army, Tulane, you have to talk about Louisiana and the Sun Belt as well. They're 7-1. Their only loss is to Tulane, so they're tied to that team a little bit. But they have the potential to run the table as well, have a pretty decent resume. They beat Wake Forest. They beat a Texas State team we had high hopes for. But if they could be another team that's maybe a 1-loss conference champion, that could go up in the rankings. But again, it's going to be very interesting to watch how the committee watches these programs in particular and maybe moves them into the top 25, 24, 23 race. Just in case Boise State does hypothetically lose that conference championship game, maybe they can sneak one of those teams up in there if they hypothetically, again, it's a big hypothetical. Boise State's a wagon right now. But if they do lose, it definitely opens some things up for those teams I just mentioned.
Okay, so a couple of teams in the boot maybe keep an eye on out there. Now, Cato, we talk about this a lot in the office, and like Washington State is technically not a G5 school, but they're playing a G5 schedule in the Mountain West. Got the loss to Boise State, but besides that now, the Cougs, I mean, only 1 loss. Is there a world where Washington State could maybe find their path into the college football playoff? The trick with them, though, no conference bid or no conference title, I suppose, to help them into that field of 12.
Yeah, I've been kind of calling Washington State Notre Dame Junior Day, JD. They're an independent team. They can't get an automatic bid from the Power Four. They can't get an auto bid from the Group of Five. They're kind of in limbo right now when it comes to being conference. They're pretty much an independent team, but they're an awesome program. I think they're going to go 10-1. They're going to run the table here. Boise State, it was a tough loss. I believe it was 45-24, but they have a pretty solid resume. They took care of business in the Apple Cup against Washington. They took care of business against a Texas Tech team who's now looking a little bit like they're showing some signs of life. Yeah. So they've taken care of business where they've had to. They're just at 20, and like we've mentioned before with some of these other teams, they don't really have many opportunities to continue building up on their resume. So they're going to really have to rely on the teams in front of them and behind them to maybe take some losses and slowly but surely make their way up the rankings. But I think one of the most interesting things, we all got excited with the college football rankings on Tuesday. We were all really pumped about that. But I think next week and the week after, seeing how the committee changes the teams based on wins and losses is going to be even more fascinating to watch. And for these Group of Five teams, for independent teams like a Notre Dame, for a team like Washington State, it's going to have a huge impact to see how they move in the rankings as long as they keep taking care of business and the teams around them keep losing. So I'm pumped for it. I'm fascinated by it. It's November, and I'm just excited to see where these teams end up.
They remember November, baby. They remember November. Well, Caden, we appreciate you making time, brother, and jumping on and making us all more intelligent about the G5. We're going to do this a lot more here in the next coming weeks because of these college football playoff rankings and the potential of what Boise State could be, what Army could be with their dance against Notre Dame here not too soon. Appreciate you, brother, jumping on the hard count today.
Always a pleasure. App State plays tonight. If anyone wants to tune in on some Group of Five ball, we got Coastal Carolina tonight. A nice Sun Belt matchup on a Thursday. How much better can it get? Why not us?
This guy's dialed in, baby. This guy's dialed in. Heck yeah, we love it. Caden Smith, best in the business, G5 savant, joining the hard count today. Phenomenal stuff, as always. Make sure you follow Caden on all the socials as well. Great stuff, consistently. And we're glad to have him making us all, like I said, more intelligent when it comes to the world. It is the G5 that will absolutely factor into the college football playoff. It's funny whenever you watch Ari Wasserman's Bubble Watch, or you see Andy Staples' projected college football playoff that comes out every Sunday. There's always a couple people in the mentions say, "Hey, Boise State, are you kidding me?" Yep, G5. Have an auto bid this year. That's the new world of college football. Appreciate also Nick Brake and Trey Yanity. I mean, they've been, you can't see it on the camera, and that is because they're so good at their job. They've been dialed in, making everything move and shake here, getting guys set up, getting Andy Staples set up on the digital interview. We got Caden Smith over here off to my right off camera. So appreciate those guys doing what they do and making this whole thing go. Let's move on to some more Week 11 talk, because I think as much as LSU Bama is fascinating, and it is fascinating, Georgia Ole Miss to me holds nearly as much intrigue. Obviously, there's college football playoff implications. If Ole Miss loses, they're out. But honestly, I think we get some answers here about some of the questions that I personally have when it comes to the Georgia Bulldogs. So we'll talk about that right now. Make sure you are subscribed to the On3 YouTube channel. Listen, it's college football, nothing but college football. If you're watching live, we just talked G5 for a good 10 minutes. Like, we're talking about all of it here. The greatest sport on the face of the planet. Want you dialed in. Make sure you are subscribed. We appreciate you in advance for doing that. So when it comes to my questions around Georgia, I have sort of held this same sentiment really throughout the course of the season. It has been, hey, at the right time, Georgia, they're going to play their best football. And to some degree, that's been true, because you go to Texas, massive spot, number one team in America, you win that football game. And so at that point in time, I was like, okay, this is where Georgia does. This is where Georgia turns it on. Because this typically is the part of the year where Georgia turns it on. For those of y'all that know track and field or just watch the Olympics, the 400-meter race is wild to watch. And great 400-meter runners, for those of y'all that don't know, 400 meters, lap around the track. On that backstretch, that final 100 meters, there's a term called kicking. Essentially, it's like you give everything you got, you empty the tank. The great runners save a little bit extra for that kick to win when it's winning time. That's typically what Georgia has been in the 400 meters that is the college football season. Yeah, they get out pretty quick. They got a good pace early on, and they caught a loss this year to Alabama. It is what it is. New college football world with realignment. Okay, I get it. I know Alabama, Georgia, we wouldn't typically get that matchup, but with the new SEC schedule, we got that. But again, right around November, we see Georgia start to kick, start to separate. Well, you watched them this last weekend against Florida, and you're like, where's the kick? I thought we were about to see them separate because of how they played against Texas. I thought this was the time of the year now in November where Georgia starts to pull away from everybody. And it's not like it can't still happen. My question is, do we see Georgia kick in this game against Ole Miss? And when I say kick, I'm not talking about field goals. I'm talking about, do we see Georgia throttle the way that we expect Georgia to throttle really throughout the course of this season? And the question around Georgia is never going to be about talent, right? Like Kirby Smart since 2021, which is the metric I use because that's essentially everyone who would be on this roster from a recruiting class perspective, all top 3 classes. All right, so Georgia, when it comes to raw ingredients, will not be outdone. It will not be out-talented, if you will. This is the first time, I think, since Kirby's been at Georgia, where Ole Miss is built to match up or at least be comparable in their matchups, in the trenches against Georgia. Because that was the talking point all offseason long, right? I said it yesterday on Paul Feinbaum. Like, that is the key for Ole Miss to elevating and getting to where they want to go, competing for SEC titles and national titles. They got better in the trenches. Got Walter Nolan from A&M, a smooth 300-plus pounder. You got J.J. Pegues. He's like 320 pounds. They got some dudes now up front. Does Ole Miss to be able to ideally hold serve with what Georgia has on the offensive line? Now, it's great to have it in practice. Do you have it in reality? Because in practice, Penn State was supposed to be able to match up with Ohio State, and we all saw very clearly that was not the case. Ohio State, I think, could have made that thing very ugly if not for a couple of miscues. But again, in this spot now, the question is, do we see the internal temperature with Georgia, like we talk about a lot, do we see them dial it up a little bit? And I'll say this, I don't think that's a Kirby Smart question. Like, I don't think you have to check in with Kirby Smart in the morning and wonder if he's running hot. Kirby Smart's Kirby Smart, okay? There's a reason why he's got the national titles to his name that he does. He doesn't get complacent. He doesn't take his foot off the gas. Like, Kirby Smart's dialed in, ready to roll. Great teams, though, at Georgia, what do? They take on the persona of Kirby Smart. They turn up their internal temperature with him. Why? Because typically you have great leaders in that locker room that dial the temperature up internally as well. Like, a coach can only do so much. A staff can only do so much. You can't want it for your players. If you could, you'd have a lot more undefeated teams right now. I'll just say that right now. But historically, what has there been? Guys like a Cedric Van Prant that have been able to push the needle. Does Georgia have someone like that to dial up the internal temperature, like we've seen in the past, to allow them to play their best football right now when it matters? Because, listen, the Texas game, it's easy to get up for that one, man. It's easy to want that one. We mentioned it already. Number 1 team in America. You're going to their place. Guess what? You're not favored for the first time, and it feels like forever. Everyone's talking about how good they are, how they're the new Georgia. It's easy to get up for that game. Everyone on College game day is picking against you. It's easy to say, okay, we're going to play our best football today. We are locked in. We're focused. Now, Ole Miss is still a big game, but it does feel a little bit potholy to me. Just a little bit. And the reason why, like last year, you beat the brakes off Ole Miss. So is there the potential now just to be a normal human being and say, okay, we beat them pretty good last year. We should beat them pretty good against this year. Well, last year also, College game day was there. I'm just saying that probably adds to the environment a little bit. Also, it's a night game. This game, 3:30, on the road. No knock against Oxford, Mississippi, but you don't necessarily list Ole Miss as one of the top stadiums in the SEC when it comes to toughest environments. Like, it might be a little bit of an acclamation here if you're Georgia. Also, Georgia, you're favored. Like, Ole Miss, they got 2 losses. They're not a top 10 team. You got to bring your own juice a little bit here if you're Georgia to play your best football. Because I'll say this, going back to what we talked about with Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss, I do believe the roster has improved enough to make this really interesting. I really do. Now, here's the thing. If Georgia is who we believe they can be, if Georgia is who they have been over the course of the last few seasons, they're going to kick the door in. They're going to kick the absolute door in, and they will bring the best standard of themselves to that game. They will play to the environment of it being a November football game. They will play with something to lose, and they will make it an absolute force of a roster on Ole Miss on that Saturday. Do they bring it to the table? That's my ultimate question here. It's not a question of do they have the talent, not a question of the roster. It's a question, do they bring that roster force to the table to ultimately do what they're capable of doing against Ole Miss? And that won't just be this week, too. It'll be the next 2 weeks with Tennessee the following week. Also a look-ahead potential for Georgia. So I can't wait to watch this. I think we get some questions answered about Kirby Smart, about Georgia in this spot. And not so much Kirby Smart, but Kirby Smart's team in this spot, rather. I can't wait to watch it. It's going to be phenomenal. But if Georgia has that championship medal, to have that edge this year, we find out in this game because of all the reasons I just mentioned. Hey, appreciate everyone tuned in live. Make sure you have liked the video and subscribed to the channel. Lots going on, rocking and rolling. Almost forgot to tell y'all, man, if you are going to the LSU Alabama game this weekend in Baton Rouge, Whataburger Touchdown Tour, rolling to your city. So go ahead and check that out. A lot of different LSU athletes will be there, just giving away Whataburgers, I believe it is. I mean, it's going to be awesome. Get yourself a win to start the day. Get yourself a win before the game even happens. Whataburger Touchdown Tour, rolling through Baton Rouge. go ahead and make sure you get yourself fed before things get riled up in Death Valley. So I wanted to make sure we touched on this too, because this clip was circulating last night that we're going to show here in a couple of minutes about Dan Lanning and just getting his team dialed in for the game against Michigan. And I'll say this too, the Oregon creative team just knocks it out of the park when it comes to those cinematic recaps or any content they do. But I think this Oregon team, a little bit different than maybe we used to believe Oregon to be. Like, this is a different Ducks now. We used to think about Oregon, we would think, what, uniforms? We'd think about fast offense, which they still have both of those. We think about, well, they're scheming around their personnel. Oregon, they'll get a couple 3-stars. They'll get a couple of guys that fell through the cracks, and then maybe that 4-star there, here or there, and then they'll end up maximizing them and allowing them to be great in that system and in what they do out there developmentally. Great. Cool. That's not Oregon anymore. Oregon is no longer like the underdog or that school out there on the West Coast that has cool uniforms. Like, Oregon has legitimately flipped that entire narrative on their head. Because we used to think about Oregon, we'd say, what? Well, they got to play Stanford at some point this year. And Stanford would typically, throughout the course of a couple of years, out-physical them. Oregon wasn't tough enough. Dan Lanning has since made sure that is not the case anymore. Physically, they are both a team that is built tough and a team that plays tough. And what I mean by they're built to be tough, like, they have multiple NFL players on the offensive and defensive line. That wasn't always the case. Sure, you would have some guys throughout the course of different seasons or different eras where you would have guys go play professionally. Eric Armstead, a guy that you talk about different offensive linemen that have gone in and played professionally in Oregon. That's definitely true. DeForest Buckner. However, though, they got guys like multiple guys on both lines of scrimmage. Johnny Cornelius, Josh Connolly on the offensive line, two of the best in America. Jordan Birch, Derek Harmon, Mateo Uiagalelei. He's going to be a pro when it's his time. They're built to be tough, and then they play tough. Because you can have NFL players, ask Florida State, and not contribute at an NFL level, if that makes sense. Like, the production and the eye test sometimes don't always match up. For Oregon, they match up. They're allowing 16 points a game right now. They are top 15 in America on the offensive line when it comes to sack rate allowed. They're averaging 5 yards a carry on the ground. Like, this is a real deal Oregon team that's tough, both personnel-wise and production-wise. And so they're built tough, they play tough, but also, most importantly, they're tough mentally. And I saw this going on social media last night or in the Twitter sphere. Go ahead and watch this clip and tell me you're not ready to run through a brick wall for Dan Lanning.
I'm going to tell you to look up at the stands at some point in this game, and you're going to start to see them empty out. We've made the decision before we've even stepped on the field all day. It's thumbs down. It's no mercy.
Are you not entertained?
And when this thing's over with, we're going to ask, are you not entertained? Right? Are you not entertained? I told you about this moment on Monday. Look around. Look around.
Yes, sir.
Where'd he go? Go. Are you not entertained?
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?
But look at the arena.
Are you not entertained?
All day, baby. Thumbs down. No mercy. Gladiator reference from Dan Lanning. And I know we get to see like a window into the house, as Dan Lanning would say. I think this is a pretty accurate look at who Oregon is. They're mentally tough. They don't care about the situation. They don't care if they're on the road. They don't care if it's post-Ohio State. They got to go play Purdue on a Friday night. Like, they are the same team as much as possible as you can be to this point in the 2024 college football season as possible, week in and week out. You watch that, and you know what? Honestly, one of my first thoughts, how many times have we seen Kirby Smart give a very similar kind of inspiring speech to his locker room? Feels like several different scenarios I can point to in my mind, and I can't play them on the show because there's some other choice words in there. But like, Kirby Smart kind of says the same thing. Hey, we're winning this moment, is exactly what he said against South Carolina. We're going to be the enforcer. We are going to take it to them. We're not scared of anybody, is essentially the Kirby Smart mantra. And it's one thing to say that in a pump-up speech. It's another thing to go out and live it with your team. It's another thing for Dan Lanning and Oregon to go take it to Michigan and in that moment say, no mercy, thumbs down, watch them file out of the stadium. And so I think now going forward, people are going to say, well, that's great, but like, listen, Oregon, they're not winning the whole thing this year. And they say they're not going to beat Ohio State twice. They're not going to beat Texas or Georgia. And like all that, honestly, it may end up being true. I don't know. We're going to let the games decide, which is going to be awesome. But I would say this is not like a one-year deal for Dan Lanning where he's just got a good opportunity and the right team and they're going to pop. Like, this is now, I think, new Oregon. And the reason why I believe that is because Dan Lanning, the way that he operates, the way that they recruit, going on what is trending towards their third top 10 class. They had a top 5 portal class this past cycle. They're going to have top talent in Eugene. Why? Because he's a dog on the recruiting trail. They're going to make it a point to recruit, and also they have good resources. Like, let's be real here. Oregon, from what we can tell, well-resourced in the NIL world. And if that's going to be a major factor, as it will be for a lot of these recruits, like, that's going to win out. And with that being said now, you can get top talent, but Dan Lanning and his team, the mentality, the toughness, the overall persona, heck, the coaching staff, like, they're going to do something with that talent. Going back to the staff, Dan Lanning has hired 2 OCs. Both have been hits. Kenny Dillingham, now a head coach at Arizona State, and Will Stein, who I think it's just a matter of time before he decides he wants to be a head coach somewhere. Tosh LaPoy, they've been balling on the defensive side. Like, they've got a great staff. From what I can tell, they've got a great culture. And seeing that clip, I was like, dog, I'm ready to go play for Dan Lanning tomorrow. Like, I'm ready to go run down on kickoff. Probably can't help you right now out of the backfield or at either skill position, but like, kick the ball off. I'll go headhunt for Dan Lanning. If that's the intensity he's approaching it with. As a player, you feel that. And quite frankly, that intensity, again, it permeates throughout your locker room, permeates throughout your culture, and it makes you want to even go harder for your coach. So I think it's a different Oregon team than it's been over the course of the last decade plus. I cannot wait to watch how they finish the season, and getting to see that clip, getting to see their approach on the road at Michigan, and to have it come to fruition after he told them no mercy, thumbs down all day, they're going to file out of the stadium, that was epic. Again, very Kirby-esque, if you ask me, which no surprise given his background and where he comes from as a college football head coach. Hey, a lot going on today, man. A lot going on. We appreciate y'all rocking and rolling with us if you're watching live, if you're watching it on playback. Nick Brake deserves a ton of credit, getting Caden Smith set up, getting Andy Staples set up in a matter of a moment's notice. We appreciate y'all being dialed in, man, and making this show what it is. Again, feel lucky, feel grateful to do this with y'all on a daily basis, 3 times a week live. I mean, absolutely ridiculous, and very, very thankful for y'all. For Nick Brake on the 1s and 2s, for myself, JD Piquel, let's have a tremendous Week 11 college football season, and we're going to make it count. Love y'all. Appreciate y'all. Going to keep this party rolling, and we will see y'all